My stepdad demanded I pay him $400 rent in my own house. But when I discovered my mother hid for 12 years that I was the owner, I rented them out, uncovered $130K in fraud, and now my mom faces the justice she never saw coming. I'm 18 years old. Well, I just turned 18 like 2 months ago, and I still live with my mom and stepdad in the same house where I grew up. I work part-time at a supermarket while finishing high school. Nothing fancy, you know. But what happened a few weeks ago basically blew up my family, and I discovered things that I never imagined were happening. And honestly, I need to tell this because I still can't believe that my own mother lied to me for years about something so important. I guess I should start at the beginning. I mean, with my biological dad, his name was Nicholas, and he died when I was 6 years old. Cancer. It was really fast. I don't remember much about him, to be honest. Just some blurry images of when he'd take me to the park or read me stories before bed, that kind of stuff. My mom, Barbara, remarried like 3 years later to Douglas, and he's basically been the father figure in my life since then. Douglas isn't a bad guy. I mean, he was never abusive or anything like that. But there was always like a distance between us, you know what I mean? Like he never quite saw me as his actual son. The house where we live is nice. Nothing luxurious, but it has 3 bedrooms, a small yard. It's in a quiet neighborhood. I always thought it belonged to Douglas and my mom, like they had bought it together or something. I never stopped to think about it because, well, I was a kid and then a teenager, and you don't think about those things when you're 12 or 15. Life was normal. I went to school, hung out with friends, worked on weekends, the usual. Douglas worked at a logistics company, something with transportation, and my mom was an administrative assistant at a dental clinic. We didn't have extra money, but we didn't lack anything either, or so I thought. Everything started to change like a month and a half ago, right after my 18th birthday. We were having dinner. I remember my mom had made lasagna, and Douglas suddenly says, "Zachary, now that you're of legal age, I think it's time you start contributing more to the household expenses." I just looked at him like, okay, makes sense. And I told him, yeah, I could give more for food or help with internet or whatever they needed. But then he says, "No, I mean, you should pay rent. Like $400 a month seems fair to me." And I was like, wait, what? $400? That was almost everything I made at the supermarket. I told him it seemed like too much, that I was just starting out and still in school. But Douglas got kind of serious and said, "Well, if you don't like it, you can look for your own place." My mom didn't say anything, just moved food around on her plate and avoided looking at me, which already seemed weird. That night I stayed awake thinking, are they really going to kick me out if I don't pay? What's up with that? And then I remembered something my paternal grandmother had told me years ago. When I was like 12, something about how my dad, Nicholas, had left things arranged for me. At the time I didn't pay attention because I was a kid, but now that conversation came back to mind. The next day, I went to my grandmother's house. She lives like 20 minutes away. And I asked her directly, "Grandma, what was that thing you told me years ago about Dad leaving something for me?" She stayed quiet for a moment and then went to her room and came back with a box full of papers. She told me, "Your father left the house in your name, Zachary. It's in his will. When he died, the property passed to you legally." I was in shock. Literally couldn't process what I was hearing. I said, "So the house is mine? Since when?" And she answered, "Since your father passed away. When you were 6 years old, your mother knows this perfectly well because she was at the entire reading of the will. She gave me copies of the documents, the will, the property title. Everything was there with my name on it. I couldn't believe it. I went back home with the papers in my hand and my heart beating 1,000 times per hour. Douglas was watching TV in the living room, and my mom was in the kitchen. I stood in front of Douglas and said, "About that rent thing you mentioned yesterday, I think we need to talk." He looked at me like, "Okay, did you decide when you're going to start paying?" And I pulled out the papers and put them in front of him and said, "Turns out I'm not going to pay rent because this house is mine. My father left it to me when he died." Douglas stared at the papers and then started laughing. I mean, he literally laughed like I had told him a joke. He said, "What is this, Zachary? Some kind of prank? I told him, "It's not a prank. Check the documents. They're certified. The property title is in my name." He kept that smile like, this kid is crazy. But when he actually started reading the papers, the smile started fading. He called my mom. "Barbara, come here." And when she saw what I had in my hands, she turned pale. And I mean pale. Like she had seen a ghost. So that's when I decided to turn the situation around. Because I was angry. Really angry that they had hidden this from me for years. I told them, "Well, since we're talking about rent, I think you're the ones who should be paying me for living here." Douglas exploded, started yelling that this was ridiculous, that he had been paying all the house expenses for years. Who did I think I was? My mom just cried and said, "Zachary, please, it's not that simple. There are things you don't understand." I yelled back, "What don't I understand? That you hid from me that I own my own house? That you let me live here thinking it was yours when it was always mine?" That night was horrible. Nobody talked to anyone. I locked myself in my room, and they in theirs. But what happened after that was even worse, because turns out this was just the tip of the iceberg of lies and secrets. Like, 2 days later, I started noticing my mom making weird phone calls. She'd lock herself in the bathroom or go out to the yard to talk on the phone. One afternoon, I got home from work earlier than normal and heard her in her bedroom talking in a low voice. I stood outside the door and managed to hear her saying, "We can't tell him yet. If he finds out, it's going to get worse. We have to solve this before he discovers it." My mind started racing with all the possibilities. Solve what? What else were they hiding from me? That same week, I noticed Douglas would leave the house like at 8 at night saying he was going for cigarettes or to the gas station, stuff like that, but he'd take like an hour or more. One night, I decided to follow him. I know, sounds kind of stalkerish, but I needed to know what was going on. I followed him in my old car, a 2010 Honda Civic I bought with my savings, and I saw him arrive at a Starbucks like 15 minutes from the house. He got out and went in, and I waited outside a few minutes before going in too. When I went in, I saw him sitting at a table in the back with a guy I'd never seen, like about 50 years old, formal suit. They were exchanging papers, and Douglas looked stressed, nervous, running his hands through his hair. I couldn't get closer without him seeing me, but I took out my phone and took some photos of them. From far away. I left before Douglas came out and got home before him. When he came in like 30 minutes later, he acted like nothing, said there was a lot of traffic at the gas station. But the next day at dinner, I decided to confront them directly. I told them, "Okay, I know something else is going on. I've heard you talking in secret, and I know Douglas is meeting someone in hiding." My mom and Douglas looked at each other with that look. That's like, shit, he caught us. My mom started crying again, and Douglas just stayed quiet looking at his plate. I insisted, "If there's something that has to do with the house or with me, I need to know now. I'm sick of the lies." It was my mom who finally spoke. She said, "Zachary, there's something we haven't told you about the house. When your father died, yes, he left you the property, but there was also a mortgage, a debt." I asked her, "How much?" She stayed quiet and then whispered, $80,000. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. $80,000. I repeated the number out loud like, $80,000? And when exactly were you planning to tell me this? Douglas then intervened and said that he had been paying the mortgage all these years. That's why he thought he had the right to ask me for rent, that he had invested a fortune in maintaining the house. I asked him, "And what was that meeting you had at Starbucks?" He got even paler and admitted he was talking to a financial advisor about refinancing the mortgage or taking out a second loan on the house. I yelled at him, "You were going to take out more debt on my house without even telling me?" He tried to justify himself saying they needed the money, that they had expenses, but I didn't want to hear more excuses. That night I searched the internet for what I could do. I read about mortgage debts, inheritances, everything I could find. And the next day I called a financial advisor, a different one from the one Douglas had contacted obviously, and asked for an appointment. I explained the whole situation over the phone, and he told me to come see him together with my mom and Douglas to review all the documents. Like a week later, we managed to coordinate the meeting. It was super awkward. Nobody talked in the car on the way to the bank. The advisor's name was Albert. Guy about 40 years old, very professional. He reviewed all the papers, the original mortgage, the payments Douglas had made, everything. After like an hour of reviewing, he explained the situation to us. He said that indeed I was the legal owner of the house, that the $80,000 mortgage still existed, and that if we wanted to keep the house, we needed to make a payment plan. He gave us options, like paying a certain amount monthly for 10 or 15 years depending on how much we could give. Numbers were spinning in my head. They were like $800 or $900 a month for years. We left there in silence, and I started thinking in the car. I didn't want to lose the house. It was the only thing I had left from my dad, Nicholas. It was his legacy for me. But we also didn't have $80,000 lying around to pay everything at once. Then an idea occurred to me. I told them, what if we rent out the house? We can get tenants who pay like $1,500 or $1,600 a month, use that to pay the mortgage, and we move to a cheaper place in the meantime. Douglas said it was crazy. Where were we going to live? But my mom stayed thoughtful and said maybe it wasn't such a bad idea. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing the house, cleaning everything, fixing details, taking photos. I put it up for rent on several internet sites, and in less than a week, I already had like 10 interested people. We ended up renting it to a young couple, Ian and Chloe, newlyweds. He worked in something with technology, and she was a nurse. They seemed like good people. They paid the deposit and first month without problem. We moved to a 2-bedroom apartment like 30 minutes from there. Smaller but cheaper, like $900 a month between the three of us. I thought that with that we had already solved the problem, that I could finally breathe easy and start paying off the debt little by little. But turns out the universe had other plans because like 2 weeks ago, I received a call from the bank. It was Albert, the advisor, and his voice sounded serious. He told me, Zachary, I need you to come to the bank as soon as possible. Something appeared in the property records that we need to discuss. I asked him what it was, but he insisted I come in person. I went the next day, alone, because I was already tired of dealing with my mom and Douglas in these situations. Albert sat me down and showed me more papers. He explained that they had found an additional lien on the house, another loan that my mom had taken out, like 5 years ago, using the property as collateral. $50,000 more dollars. $50,000 more dollars. I just sat there, unable to speak for like a full minute. I asked him, how is it possible that she took out a loan on a house that wasn't hers? He explained to me that technically she had forged some documents, had said she was the legal owner, when in reality I had been since I was 6 years old. I left the bank shaking. I don't know if from rage or shock or both. I drove straight to the apartment and found my mom alone. Douglas was working. I confronted her immediately, showed her the papers for the lien, and yelled, $50,000 more dollars? How many more lies are there, Barbara? I didn't even call her mom anymore. I was too angry. She completely broke down, fell to the floor crying, and admitted everything. She said they had financial problems years ago, that Douglas had lost his job for a while, that they needed the money to survive, and she didn't know what else to do. I told her, and it didn't occur to you to ask me? Talk to me about the situation? Even if I was a minor at the time, we could have found another solution. She just kept repeating, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, but the apologies didn't mean anything to me anymore. I did the math in my head. $80,000 from the original mortgage plus $50,000 from the lien. That was $130,000 total. $130,000 of debt on a house that was supposedly my inheritance, my future. I spent the next few days barely talking to anyone. I'd go to work, come back to the apartment, lock myself in my room. Douglas tried to talk to me once, said he didn't know about the second loan either, that my mom had done it without telling him. I don't know whether to believe him or not, honestly. At this point, I don't trust either of them. I talked to Albert again, and he explained, I had legal options, that I could sue my mom for fraud, that I could force the sale of the house to recover some money, but all those options meant completely destroying what little was left of my family. Now I'm here, 18 years old, owner of a house that has more debt than it's probably worth, living in a tiny apartment with 2 people I don't trust anymore, working at a supermarket and trying to finish high school, the couple renting the house, Ian and Chloe, are paying well and on time. That's at least something positive. With their rent, I can cover the original mortgage and have a little left over, but the other loan is still there, accumulating interest. I haven't made any definitive decision yet about what to do. Part of me wants to sue my mom, make her pay for all the lies and fraud. Another part just wants to save my dad's house no matter what, even if it means working 2 or 3 jobs for the next 15 years to pay off all the debt. And there's another part of me that simply wants to sell everything, take what I can recover, and start over somewhere else, far from this whole situation. What I do know is that I'm not going to let that house be lost without a fight. It's the only thing I have left from Nicholas, from my real dad. And even though I barely remember him, I know he wanted me to have something, to have a secure future. My mom and Douglas destroyed that with their decisions and lies, but I'm not going to let them also destroy my will to recover it. I'm 18 years old. I'm young. I have time to fix this mess that others created. It's not going to be easy. It's probably going to be the hardest thing I do in my life, but I'm going to do it. Last week, Douglas asked me if I could ever forgive them. I didn't know what to answer. I told him, I don't know. Ask me in a few years when I see if I manage to save the house or not. He just nodded and left. My mom doesn't even try to talk to me about this anymore. I think she knows she broke something that might not be fixable. And I keep going forward, one day at a time, trying to understand how I went from being a normal 8-year-old kid to dealing with $130,000 of debt and a destroyed family. But I'm going to make it. Somehow, I'm going to make it.